This session is What's in a Soup, and hopefully we'll be cooking together today and you'll have something ready by the time we get to lunch. But just so you guys are aware, this is going to be a very active session where your participation will be required. So hopefully everyone who's on the phone, you can hear me clearly and that you are able to participate. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and put up some instructions for you while we wait for other folks to join. So there are two ways that you can participate today. Option one is to grab your cell phone, and I think this is probably maybe one of the easiest. Grab your phone and open your text messages and type strategic 140, so that's strategic with an S 140, and send it to 22333, and you will receive a confirmation message. Or if you're one of those fancy folks with two monitors at your desk, then you can open a separate browser in the other monitor that you have and go to this URL that's shown on your screen right now. And you can just skip the registration. You'll still be able to see the questions and participate. And I guarantee you'll love this. So please, we'll give you a minute or two to go ahead and either set up your phone or set up your web browser so that you can participate in today's session. Let's get started. Hopefully everyone has already been able to log in again to either option one or all right. And we'll have these instructions again, but I do want to jump in. So again, let's get to introductions. Today's session is What's in a Soup, and this session is really to provide you with some information about what all goes into category management. And for the folks who joined the earlier session, you guys heard that it's not just about SSVs. And so this session is specifically to sort of walk you through the different strategies that really goes into category management that makes it so much more effective and ideally will help you in your day-to-day jobs. So with that said, I want to first of all introduce my co-chef, Mr. David Ritter, who has served as an executive agent for over 12 IT SSVs, and Mr. York Whitaker, who is a very seasoned category manager with over 13 years managing the development of SSVs and helping to promulgate sourcing and strategic sourcing and category management across DHS and the federal government. So rather than me tell you about them, gentlemen, I'd like for you to each introduce yourself. So let's start with Mr. Ritter.
Yes, first of all, good morning. Ricardo, thanks again for the invitation today. I've been with DHS since 2006. I currently work in the Office of Procurement Operations IT Acquisition Center. Our two executives within the Office of Procurement Operations, our HCA is Vicki Short, Deputy HCA is Juan Aradia. And as you mentioned, I've been involved in either administering or awarding approximately 12 strategically sourced vehicles in support of the DHS enterprise. Very happy this morning to represent all the contracting officers within OPO, especially the ones that work on all the DHS-wide procurements within the IT Acquisition Center, Departmental Operations Acquisition Division. They handle the majority of the department-wide efforts for OPO, as well as we have contracting officers in other areas as well. But again, thanks for having me this morning.
You're welcome, Mr. Ritter. York?
Good morning, Ricardo, and thank you for having me as a panelist. And I'm honored to be with David. I worked with David before when I was IT. Unfortunately, now I don't work in IT. I don't get to work with David, but it was always an honor to work with him. He understood the process. He understood the mission, and we got it done. But now, as Ricardo said, I've been here for a long time. I joined in 2008 in the Strategic Sourcing Program Office at that time as a contractor and became a Fed and never looked back. The reason I'm still here is not because of Ricardo or Jackie. It's because I really like my work, and it's partially to do with Jackie, of course, but I really like my work. I love collaboration. I love efficiency. When we can work together and be efficient, I love saving taxpayer dollars. We can do that. If we're efficient, we work together, we generally save taxpayer dollars. And that's why I come in every day, Ricardo. I've done it for 13 years, and I'll continue to do it unless I get kicked out of here for saying something inappropriate today. I don't know. But
let's hope not today.
But I've enjoyed my time here, and hopefully we can provide some useful information to the group today.
Perfect. Well, again, audience, as I mentioned, this is going to be very an active participation. So I really hope that you guys will, be able to cook the soup with me. I have my little ladle here. Before we get started, I just want to have a gauge of what everyone thinks about category management. So we're going to go to our very first poll everywhere question. And this is how you can test to make sure it works. So let's go to our first question. And by the way, the instructions are actually at the top as well, in case you don't have it. So in 1 minute, what is the one word or phrase that comes to mind when you think about category management? Consolidation. Innovation, well, that's good. Efficiency, necessary, saving money. A lot of those are strategic sourcing. Yep, that's a huge part too. Simple. Yeah. So a lot of those are definitely words that we would like to use when we talk about category management. We'll talk about consolidation though a little bit later. All right. So let's move to our next poll. Oh, whoever said awesome, thank you.
That's probably a plant, Ricardo.
Probably. So our next question is going to be so these are just more targeted choices for you. So category management is all about, and select A, B, or C. That's all you have to type is A, B, or C into your phone or in the web to see what you think. And for the folks who are typing in the chat, you have to do it on folder aware because this doesn't really count if you do it in the chat. I can't really see. You don't count as part of the percentages. So the interesting story about your answer choices here for this one is most people are choosing C, which is great, which means that you've taken the overview category management training throughout the year. And you've obviously learned something new or learned something good that we've been training forever. But yes. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The final poll before we move on is category management the same as strategic sourcing or just a fancier word? I think most of you are taking the middle road on this one. Yep, I think most of you are just keeping it safe. That's totally fine. All right. Well, thank you very much for that initial participation. Hopefully you got a handle for how Poll Everywhere works as we go through the rest of today's briefing. So for the interest of time, let me move on. So let's define what category management is. And this morning the keynote speaker and even Lee, when he was on the panel, has defined category management several different times. And it really is just a strategic approach that enables the federal government to acquire and manage common goods more efficiently. And most recently, one of the things that OMB wants us to put out there is that we're managing as a knowledgeable, organized entity, like having a good understanding of our requirements, which leads me to the next point. Category management is not about a strategic sourcing contract vehicle. And we mentioned that this morning. It's not about SSVs. It is really about satisfying a requirement. How we satisfy that requirement really drives category management principles, and that is why we at DHS have a specific process for category management in how we execute it. So, as a reminder, we mentioned in the first session this morning, so next slide, that category management extends beyond contract consolidation and use. It is not just about SSVs. So that's one of the reasons why when somebody mentioned consolidation earlier, I just wanted to make sure that it's not necessarily about consolidating contracts or consolidating department-wide requirements into just one contract vehicle. It really depends. We have to go through a lot of different steps to make sure that we are making an informed decision when we actually do decide to go out and purchase something. So the category management process requires just several ongoing and interconnected strategies or specifically at DHS or category managers to ensure effective management and oversight of the goods and services within a specific spend category, which is to ultimately deliver mission requirements in the most efficient and economical way. So as we make our soup today, we will explore these 8 categories. So let's get started. The first ingredient that we have is what we consider requirements analysis. And so requirements analysis is a process conducted to determine what goods and services are needed and by whom, how the goods and services are utilized, and to establish if there are overlapping requirements across DHS. That's one of the things that SSO does, is making sure that if we can identify that there are requirements that overlaps across all multiple components, then maybe it's something that we might want to look into to see if there is a way for us to acquire that goods and services much more efficiently. Another thing that requirements analysis includes, and most people don't know this, is it's important for us to understand the customer journey for using the goods and services to inform the requirement. And even though Jackie this morning mentioned this as part of demand management strategy, which is sort of similar when we're thinking about requirements, but you need to understand how you're using an item. For example, she bought a printer, but the printer is just a device, to enable printing, but there's a lot of things that goes into that affected the way that she had to change her consumption behavior and also try to get cheaper prices, right? Because, the printer requires paper, it also requires ink. Requirements analysis matters because it's necessary to determine what goods are needed and by whom. The customer expectations is also very important, and how that solution is going to be delivered. Hand in hand with requirements analysis is spend analysis. So that will be our next ingredient. So now spend analysis is the process of collecting, cleansing, which is very, very important, classifying and analyzing procurement data to understand what is going on within this, the category, and to identify opportunities to generate efficiencies. At DHS, again, for anyone who's taken the overview training, we talk about this. We have established category management taxonomy, which breaks down for our DHS procurement spend into 9 related spend categories. But that, even on the back end, we go further into subcategories and functional groupings of goods and services that we purchase across the agency. So having an understanding of historical and projected analysis, spend analysis matters because it's necessary for the identification of past and future trends. Like, you really want to know, well, what did I spend before? How much do I expect to spend in the future? And that will definitely inform you, your IGC, for example, or just inform you of what really is the reality, like how much can you actually afford. But it also is to not only glean information into the potential prices to be paid, but also to uncover any unnecessary costs previously paid that may be eliminated for future requirements. Again, if you were in this morning's session, Jackie mentioned that she was paying so much money for the ink cartridges that came originally with her printer, but having looked into it, she was able to actually take that empty cartridge bin, go to somewhere else and get it refilled for way less price. So having, doing that analysis can actually help you and change certain behaviors that you probably would have done before. Spend analysis is also necessary during the category management process to help differentiate quality and value. And it should always be done prior to implementation of any contract solution. And this is one of the reasons why one of the agency required actions that OMB gave to all agencies as part of category management is the sharing of data. And one of the reasons is making sure that across the government, we can see what folks are paying for different things. For example, if the DoD is paying, price X for the same exact item that DHS is buying, well, let's find out why. Let's dig into that some more and see why DoD is getting a lower price for the same exact thing that we're purchasing. And there could be a lot of different reasons, but unless you do your requirements analysis coupled with spend analysis, you probably will not be able to get to the meat of that. So let's hear from York. York, I'm going to pick on you right now because I know that you have been in the Strategic Solutions Office for quite some time now, and you've led several different initiatives. So I'd like to know from you, like, how does SSO conduct and uses requirements analytics, and spend analysis in its decision-making process? So first question, how does SSO work among the components to perform requirements analytics?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, spend and requirements analysis is something we've been doing for years, and it's critical for strategic sourcing vehicles, and it's critical for baselining requirements and baselining understanding what we're going to work on here in the SSO department. So what I always do this, and it's building strong IPTs, right? If we have an initiative for whatever it is, let's call it widgets, we establish a strong IPT. When I say strong, I need folks that know that widget inside and out. I know they have to understand it from a operational perspective, and also what it will hold in the future. These strong IPTs with experts across the department are formed. They are generally run co-led by our office and the executive agent. Run these IPTs where we look across the department at spend and, more importantly, the requirements. Right? Requirements are like anything. They get dated and they become obsolete after a while. So first thing we have to do is understand the lay of the land of requirements. We do that generally by data calls. Very detailed data calls come through the IPT where we obtain many different fields. And one of those fields is actually the requirements that are currently in place, right? The current requirements will be in the current contracts, right? That's our baseline, what we're doing right now, right? Once we understand the lay of the land, our current requirements, we understand what's the future hold, right? What do those requirements look like in the future? Are they the same? Can they be improved? Are they obsolete? Those kind of things got to be hashed out through the IPT before we move forward. Once those understandings are made, we have to understand the lane up between common requirements. Does ICE have the same requirements as TSA? Does TSA have the same requirements as FEMA, and so forth? Generally speaking, and this is, it's very uncommon where the requirements are that much different, where we can't work together to put a contract in place or other solution in place to meet those requirements. We might have to make a special claim for a special component. If we have Coast Guard with a salt sea spray requirement that the other components don't need, well, we can still order a piece of equipment, especially for Coast Guard on that contract on a separate claim and separate entry in a statement of work. We can do those anomalies, right? So from there, just because we know our requirements, we think we know our requirements, well, what about a requirement in respect to the vendor community, right? We have to run our requirements by the vendors, and I don't care what commodity it is, IT or weapons and ammunition or professional service and mission support. Yeah, we have to understand our requirements make sense to us, of course, but to the vendor community. Are our requirements unreasonable? Are they unmeetable? Right? I can just give you a quick little story here. I was working on a very important detection equipment initiative, and we met with the vendors. They said, hey, can you give us 5 more seconds for processing time? If you give us 5 more seconds of processing time, we're going to get a lot better results, a lot less false alarms. And we said, yeah, we can reduce that requirement and give you additional 5 seconds if we're getting better results. You have to kind of run it. You got to run your requirements by your vendor community. And of course, you have to understand the vendors have a certain certain aspect that they might be providing requirements you really don't need, but you have to understand what they can offer and understanding that, right? So that's the next best thing, is setting out some, either you're doing an industry day or, more importantly, you're actually engaging them directly in meetings. I can't really do that in IT where you have hundreds and hundreds of vendors, but some of the other commodities you can do a direct engagement with the vendor community, understanding that our requirements make sense and they are executable, right?
Yeah, and thank you very much for that point, York. I think that's a great point that we're actually going to come to when we get to supplier relationship management, which is one of the ingredients that we have coming up. So for this one, before I let you go, can you also tell us about, this is the last question I have for you on this one. Can you also tell us about how SSO does their spend analysis, and how is the data validated, and what decision does it inform?
Okay, just to finish up the last one. Last, we look across the federal government, right? Our requirements are DHS, our friends and brethren across the DOD, DOJ, they also have requirements we can utilize. So that's the last point on the other question. But the last question said, how do you do spend analysis? right? But a lot of it is, everybody, FPSNG is where we start. FPSNG is a good start, right? It gives you a broad lay of the land where we're spending our money by PSC code, by NICS code. Gives you a lay of the land. It's a high-level look at what we're doing. It helps. That's how you start any kind of strategic sourcing or strategic solution office. You start with a high-level spend and you drill down, right? You can get pretty good data, but you're going to have to spend a considerable amount of time with FPSNG data to cleanse it, right, and understand it, because PSCs and NICS can be misleading. You have to drill down to vendor name. You have to drill down to the description field. If it's a good description field, you can understand. But that's the first level. And if you're not getting in there, again, through a strong IPT, you would want to do a data call to obtain current contract. If I have all the current contracts for that commodity or that service, I can pull that data exactly what we're spending on that certain whatever your commodity is you're doing a street source of vehicle for, whatever you're doing. You can drill down to really into what we're spending on that commodity through the data call. Again, contract numbers, we can pull the data and understand what we're spending on. And then if you have that, you can then go to your contract writing systems and get the details you need about that spend. Then lastly, and we found this many times over the year, the vendor community has great spend analysis. They know, because they have accounting systems, they know exactly what the government is spending with them. We know our vendor community. We know, and we can certainly reach out to them to validate our numbers and validate our spend. We can certainly let the vendor community and say, what do you have? What did DHS spend with you guys last year? And so forth. They can certainly help us with our spend analysis. Now, the answer to your last question is, what do we do with this data, right? It informs everything about an acquisition, right? And it forms, is it strategic sourceable? Is this something that we want to do as it supports the business case assessment, right? Business case assessment, is the department going to follow through and do a strategic source of vehicle? That supports that decision. It also supports your sourcing decision, right? How am I going to source this requirement? That should also inform that. And another thing will inform is your acquisition strategy. Where can I get this, right? Is the GSA schedule best? I don't know, and so forth. It helps to form those decisions. Is good analytics.
Great. Thank you for sharing that information, York. And a couple key points that I just want to make sure resonates with the audience is we don't just do spend analysis or requirements analysis in silo or just within DHS. We are also making sure that we're validating some of those requirements with our suppliers as well, which is very, very important and key. And we're actually going to talk about supplier relationship management in a couple of slides. But the session this morning also talked about the importance of having or conducting supplier relationship management. So we will, come back to this to those key points later on. But before we move on, I want to see, how well our audience is familiar with this next ingredient. So let's take a quick minute to answer this next poll. Just want to get an understanding if folks know what this is. Yeah, I see some people are second guessing themselves there. All right. So yeah, in the interest of time, we'll move on. I think it's a little around 50-50, but as I imagine, most people probably have never heard of what demand management is. So why don't we talk about it? So demand management is, sometimes it's very complicated for even myself to fully understand or articulate what it is, but it is the forecasting, planning and management of the need for and availability of goods or services. It includes identification of DHS's purchasing and consumption behaviors to ensure adequate supply to meet demand and opportunities to reduce costs and generate efficiencies. One of the other key part of what demand management is not just, oh, I want something, but are there enough suppliers out there to provide that information for me? So it's also as an extension of the requirements analytics process. Demand management also includes, just the identification of our purchasing and consumption habits to inform buying, process, or policy decisions, and making sure that there are vendors there to support our demand. It's very, very key there. So DHS actually implements demand management strategies across the agency where sometimes you probably aren't even aware. And where applicable, these strategies are implemented within our DHS-wide strategic sourcing contract vehicles and other times we reinforce these through policies. So I'll share a couple with you. I definitely can't go through all of these, but some that might actually make more sense to you. Let me start with the default print setting for duplex printing, which was actually a directive that was issued back in 2013. This is one of the things that our keynote address speaker actually talked about, but in her household, this is what she did. But even at DHS, we actually thought about that. So as part of our sustainable practices, we require the enabling of duplex printing features on all eligible printers or multifunctional devices and copiers, or that any new procurement have these features. And what it does, it forces us to select either single-sided printing or colored. So if you go to print on one of those devices, it's automatically going to give you black and white and double-sided. Another big one that really impacts us is our IT refresh policy that was issued by our USM in March 2018. And that one is actually very key. If you guys know about FirstSource, you know that FirstSource is one of DHS's key department-wide contract vehicles. And one of the reasons is making sure that that vehicle is in place so that DHS can have a IT infrastructure that is resilient. So we always have something to replace aging equipment, and we have the means to do so expeditiously. In fact, as part of that policy, the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer is actually responsible to ensure that there are SSVs in place to support the department's IT needs. So that is a department-wide strategy that we put in there. Another one that, you know, if we have any of our law enforcement folks on the line today, you might know this, that DHS now has SSVs in place for both duty and training ammunition. And one of the reasons why we did that is because it's more expensive to use duty ammunition for training purposes. So why spend money on just having, you know, duty ammunition that we're going to use at a range to practice and so forth when we can get much cheaper ammunition for our training purposes. And there's actually another key example of demand management in DHS's recent move to one standard qualification target for law enforcement officers. And I'm not going to go into that because York will actually probably talk about this a little bit later on. So let's go on to our next poll, see what you guys actually think about supplier relationship management. So the question is, do you think that market research is the same as supplier relationship management? And just be careful. There's no wrong or right answer here. I see that there's some very strong no ways here. And that's totally fine. All right, I'm gonna continue. So let's talk about SRM. So SRM is a systematic approach to evaluating the vendors that supply goods and services to the agencies. And when we say systematic, we want to make sure that we're really looking at our vendors critically. So segmenting our suppliers into classification, whether it's these are critical suppliers, you know, like if our IT infrastructure goes down, like we can't do anything else. Cybersecurity, for example, there are only so many people in that arena. So we need to make sure that we have a good grasp of who those are. Or strategic suppliers, our transactional vendors. Hey, we need paper, right? We need pens. These are transactional suppliers. So making sure that we have a good pulse in them. And also making sure that we just don't know about who they are, but also developing a strategy and executing on an SRM strategy. So in many cases, SRM focuses on strategic two-way communications in an effort to develop a mutually beneficial relationship with our industry partners. And what matters is vendor, you know, like you want to make sure that you're promoting vendor dialogue and ongoing collaboration that will help to build capability gaps and also lead to increased innovation and sustainability of the goods and services we procure. Like if we just sit in silo and say we have a requirement and we just dust off our SOW that we used 5 years ago and go back out there, there is no way that we're going to know that we could have actually leveraged a much better solution for our office. So back to the poll question, market research is simply one of the output of SRM. And here's the key, it is tied to a specific procurement. SRM, however, involves, and I want to repeat myself, involves ongoing vendor engagement whether or not there is a planned procurement. And it's one of the ways that we get to keep a pulse on the marketplace and making sure those critical, strategic, or transactional suppliers remains in play for when we need to access them. So similarly to SRM, our next ingredient is called market intelligence. And I'm just going to quickly cover what market intelligence is because it is very similar to SRM with a few, nuances. So market intelligence is the information and data that the organization derives from the marketplace through vendor interaction, so SRM piece, but also through, reviewing industrial reports and other sources to identify trends in the marketplace, cost and price drivers, supply chain dynamics. And I mentioned that too in demand management strategies where we really need to make sure that, hey, even though there's a supplier who can supply something right there and then, will they be able to consistently supply, that goods and service that we need? You also want to think about, well, what's the government market share? Are there any market sensitivities? Competitive landscape and any forthcoming innovations and products and services. And so understanding the trends in the marketplace and being able to benchmark cost requirements and any applicable drivers, will obviously impact the supply chain and our prices paid, and that will give us an idea of what we need to prepare for when we start thinking about how we're going to source certain goods or services. So, at this point, I'm going to pause so that we can actually bring in our next chef, Mr. Ritter, to get his thoughts, because I'm sure he has to do this very many times from an executive agent's perspective on both SRM and market intelligence activities. So, Mr. Ritter, how do you work with your customers? You've led a lot of different department-wide initiatives and even, just initiatives specifically for an office. So you've had to do a lot of these procurement actions. How do you work with your customer to ensure that adequate supplier engagement is conducted?
No, thank you for the question, Ricardo. Several different methods that we use, and many of these will be familiar to the 1102 community. But we use one-on-one sessions with vendors, industry days, draft RFQs, pre-proposal conferences. As much as we can, we want to engage with the industry, get their feedback on our requirements. And as you mentioned earlier, their feedback to us in terms of what they're thinking about, what's in the market capabilities, et cetera. All of that's important.
Awesome. So, and what impact do you think, doing those activities have on your acquisition strategy?
So, Ricardo, one of probably the most important information, or one thing we can glean from the information we get from industry, is it helps us with set-aside decisions, whether or not we're going to set aside a requirement for small businesses, whether or not we're going to go full and open competition. The information we get from industry definitely informs our decision in that area. In addition, as we fashion our terms and conditions and individual contracts, we'll take the information we get from industry to help us. And I think I heard York mention earlier, sometimes there are certain component-specific clauses that we may put in a contract or certain terms and conditions so that we can accommodate requirements across the enterprise.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for sharing that insight. So again, it's for the audience. I know we've been talking about SRM all morning, and I think it's it's a very key tenet of category management principles, and we just want to make sure that these activities you're incorporating in your procurement activities, not just when you have a specific procurement that you have to conduct, and just keeping a pulse on the marketplace. So I'm going to move on to the next ingredient, and this is, knowledge management, and it's so key to what we do as far as category management, because we really, again, we want to buy as a knowledgeable enterprise, and there are a lot of subject matter experts that can help us that we are not even aware of. So knowledge management here, it's, making sure that we're documenting and sharing subject matter expertise that has been developed over time, especially in a particular spend category, so that can help to inform initiatives and improve current practices. Successful implementation of category management, not only requires an understanding of our specific role in the process, and I think that's part of the issue sometimes where we know what our role is and that's what we're going to execute on. But we also need to leverage the knowledge and expertise of our DHS and government-wide counterparts and subject matter experts so that we can either share or adopt best practices in an effort to improve mission delivery, and efficiently fulfill our common needs without having to reinvent the process or starting from scratch all the time. So I know York, I'm going to bring you in here again. You've led or even helped to stand up a few commodity councils at DHS. In fact, the 3 that we currently have within SSO are within your portfolio. Could you tell us a little bit more about these councils?
Yes, thank you, Ricardo. Yes, and, thank you for the opportunity to promote my three babies here. And I think they're great organizations. Ricardo, we have 3 currently. The Detection Equipment Commodity Council, which is co-chaired by S&T, CWMD, TSA, and OCPO, and it's my point man on that is Christopher Robinson. If you have a detection equipment requirement or like to participate, please contact Christopher. Next one is the Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council. It's co-led by OCPO, which is SSO, which is my team, and OCRSO. And then it's run by my colleague, Philip Bucci. Again, if you have weapons and ammunition or law enforcement equipment requirements, if you want to collaborate about them, please join. Please contact Philip, and he'll get you started. And then lastly, you heard a lot about this morning. Mike Britt is part. He's the core of the contract and a major part of the Union Force Commodity Council. It's co-led by us and of course CBP. Again, that's a great organization. If you want to participate in that, please contact Amanda Pennell on my team as well. So Ricardo, what do we do in the question is, what do we do in the commodity councils, right? Well, we drink a lot of coffee and we have we do that, but that's not our primary mission. And they're afternoon meetings anyway, so we too late for coffee unless you're just having tea, whatever. But anyway, what do they do? I mean, they're 3 active. As Mike mentioned, all these commodity councils meet monthly. We have a vibrant agenda and great participation. I have to say that these members come every month, or if they don't come, they send an alternate. But as you can see, it's a general description of what we do. We look to make more efficient acquisition, coordination, and utilization of specific commodities across the department. So kind of a purpose is a function. I'll try to go as fast as I can, Ricardo, and kind of give an example of some of these things. Explore policies and procedures, right? What do we have across the department for policy and procedures? I'll use a Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council one, right? There's some incidences recently. We were reviewing and sharing use of force policies. Well, that was coordinated through the WAC. What was the best use of force policy? ICE and CBP wanted to coordinate, and Coast Guard and so forth. So we got together. We shared documents. We shared best use of force. That was something coordinated through the Weapons and Ammunition Contract. And again, that's not a contract, right, Ricardo? We're talking about category management. That is exactly. Contract place. That's coordination effort. That's best practices effort. Again, without that organization, bring everybody together, we can share stuff. That wouldn't happen, right? Identify best practice and opportunities, right? This is something we do a lot in the way, and Christopher does it on the deck, right? What is the best practices for utilizing? And I have to say, Chris, this is not a great thing, but we had a thing for best practices for many different things for detection equipment, right? What's the best practice for using an X-ray machine? Well, TSA has best practices. CBP has best practices. Secret Service has best practices. CIS. You go down, everybody uses X-ray machines, right? Why didn't we come together and make best practices together? And we did that for detection. We made a user's manual of sorts for configuration management, right? If you want to manage machine, you have to understand what's in it. We do that by a standard configuration management system. Again, because all the components were doing it differently. We came together and made a best practice for configuration management. Not only the hardware side, but the software side. You have to understand what's in your machine, or you can't manage it, right? So, engagement industry, we do that all the time, right? So we have a lot of industry coming to us who are not players, and Ricardo talked about that. Hey, I've got a great wall fuel detector, but I can't seem to sell one to the federal government. Well, we bring them in and understand why they're having difficulties, and we work with them to help them prepare for the next solicitation, right? We're not giving them, improper advantages, but we're helping them understand the requirements of the department and how they can do better understanding those requirements. We engage industry in that manner and understand their capabilities and the limitations of their capabilities, right? Develop joint requirements in procurements, right? That's something we do, that's every day, all day, especially in the WAC, especially in the DEC. We come together, and a lot of times the commodity councils have a sub-IPT or a Tiger team to work on these requirements. We do it for ammunition, we do it for law enforcement equipment, we do it for all kinds of course, detection equipment through the DEC, right? That's one of our strengths. Collaborate with federal agencies. These organizations have federal participation, right? On the WAC, we have to coordinate with DOJ. They're buying a lot of the same stuff as we are. Just last week, the United States Marshal Service joined the WAC. Again, they're a smaller service. They can utilize our contract, and sure, we can learn best practices from them. They were all in the law enforcement business. So we look across the department, and Christopher on the deck, he's got Bureau of Prisons. Guess what? They buy a lot of detection equipment at the prison, so we coordinate with them. Why not? We're all in this together. Why don't we leverage our expertise, leverage our contracts, and leverage our best practices? We're all buying the same similar things from the same vendors, right? Let's work together. And then last one, the DHS programs work DHS-wide program efficiencies. And my next slide will kind of talk about that. It's something, it's amazing what can be done when you roll up your sleeves and work very hard. And it's not easy because in the law enforcement, especially in the law enforcement area, a lot of this stuff is very personal to law enforcement agents and officers because it can protect them. It can save their lives. So it's very personal to them. It's hard for them to change their mind on what they're buying, but you have to explain to them that the requirements are and so forth. It takes a little time, but we're working there. So here's a great story Ricardo's got up right now, and this is something, again, coordinated through the WAC. We worked with our partner on this, was OCRSO. They kind of took the lead on it for the WAC, and you believe it or not, like anything, after 9/11 or 2020, these brought together to 9 major entities, and we're trying to standardize things. Everybody was using different targets. So an officer at an ICE would use a different target than an officer at Coast Guard. So why aren't we all using the same target? Why aren't we using the same qualification? That way, a range instructor can have the same qualifications for any component because he's using the exact same target. So again, rolling up your sleeves, having active IPTs, they standardize the target, right? That's an amazing feat just to do that. But not only that, we coordinated a department-wide solution for procuring them. As you can see, the savings is significant. I think it's like 57% or something. I can't remember, Ricardo. I thought we had that on the slide. But again, we went to the government, used to be formerly known the government printing office, now called the government publication office. We worked with them, established a contract to a small business in Maryland, a mom and pop shop who supplies these targets. Right now, we just passed the 1 million mark. Coast Guard just bought 500,000 of these because they're converting over to 9mm Glock. So this is great work. Again, it wasn't originally a contract put in place. It was to standardize the target, which rolled into a contract. Again, a lot of hard work, but this kind of coordination can be done through commodity councils, IPTs, if you have the right people and you're pushing to get it done. Thanks, Ricardo.
Great. That's actually a great story, York. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier, and hopefully the audience got that, is it's not just on these councils members of the DHS community. It's government-wide members that we're leveraging those expertise in sort of to support some of the things that we're doing. So this is a great example of how, government-wide and department-wide collaboration and knowledge sharing can affect policy and process changes that actually has huge and lasting impact. So just to move on, as you can see so far, all of these strategies that we've been discussing really plays a major role in how a requirement is sourced. So let us get, though, to the meat to our pot today, and that is sourcing strategy. And I know this one, it's kind of gray when we talk about sourcing because a lot of people, when they say sourcing, they just think of a contract vehicle. It's not necessarily just a contract vehicle when we think about sourcing, but it might get there. So let's define it first. Sourcing strategy is a fact-based approach, keyword there, fact-based approach to using market intelligence and other data with the goal of obtaining the best possible good or service at the best value for the organization. And so when we think about sourcing strategy, we have to think about the total cost of ownership, what are our organizational objectives and requirements, and it has to be a collaborative approach to developing favorable terms and conditions that aligns with processes and commercial best practices and improve overall value for our department. Why it matters? it should focus on the competitiveness and alignment and accessibility of the marketplace, including strategies, again, for obtaining best value solutions that leverages, better pricing. Like, what terms and conditions should DHS be considering? For example, when we develop SSVs, we have to consider, well, what are the terms and conditions that we're going to put into that solution? But that's something that you should also be doing, even if you're working on like your own task orders, for example, making sure that you're putting in appropriate terms and conditions that is going to make sense for your office. And so information gleaned from demand management strategies and SRM activities helps to support any consideration that must be addressed that could potentially impact the proposed sourcing strategy. And the selection of appropriate strategies not only streamlines the procurement process, but will also deliver the right solution to meet mission needs. So there are a variety of ways that we could potentially source a requirement, as you know. But if we do our due diligence, and as we've been discussing throughout this session, one of the sourcing options that is a key output of the work that the Strategic Solution Office does is the development or adoption of department-wide contract vehicles. So today, let's talk about the development piece of what we do in terms of contract vehicles. So we're going to take a break from the kitchen for a little bit and talk about how DHS implements strategic sourcing. And I know we're running a little bit behind time, so I may go through this a little bit faster, but these slides will be available and it will also be included in our category management overview training for future needs. So again, one of the important roles that SSO plays is the support and development or adoption of department-wide contract vehicles. And as you know, a lot of time is spent to ensure we develop the right department-wide contract vehicles or SSVs to meet your needs. So SSO, as an organization, cannot do this alone, which is why we collaborate with SMEs, whether it's through commodity councils or we work through IPTs. But most importantly, we partner with an executive agent from one of the DHS procurement organizations to perform contract administration. One of our key players is the Office of Procurement Operations. They actually support us on the majority of our department-wide contract vehicles that we have across the department today. And so we want to sort of talk about, like, what is it like to be an executive agent? So you're going to, audience, get your phones and computer ready again. I want to see your thoughts on, we're going to go through this real quickly, but we just want to see your thoughts on what, you think being an executive agent is. And let's see if David can address some of those concerns that you might have about being an EA and what it takes to be an EA. So our first poll is, being an EA means that I have to change my requirements. And these are like either or. So let's go. All right, David, so I think a lot of people here might agree with you. What are your thoughts here?
No, thanks, Ricardo. And again, as you mentioned, OPO works closely with your office under Vicki and Juan's leadership, definitely to put in place a number of department-wide vehicles. The answer to this question is no. Your requirements don't have to change necessarily based upon the fact that you're pursuing a department-wide effort. Through the IPT, and you heard York mention earlier, through the IPT process, that's where you bring together all the key stakeholders and you flush out your requirements, and then they're reflected in your requirement documentation.
Great. Thank you for that response, David. So the next one is, being an EA, so next poll question, being an EA forces me to conduct IPTs with all requirement holding components to establish baseline requirements. And David, and I think that this one is a little bit gray, so could you help alleviate the stress here for us?
Oh, not a problem. Well, one of the great things, Ricardo, about working on a department-wide effort, we don't have multiple IPTs. We generally have a single IPT, and one of the keys is to make sure we have representation across the DHS components, so that again you're getting the input from all of the end users of the requirement, and to make sure that when we put it in place that we're going to satisfy the needs of the department.
Perfect. The next question is, as an EA, I will have to place all orders and do the work for the rest of DHS. And I know that this is a huge concern for a lot of folks. Let's just wait and see if people can respond to this one. Unless everyone agrees that it's no way. All right, David, what are your thoughts here? Are we giving you a lot of work to do?
I think the audience has this right. In most cases, with rare exceptions, yes, the contracts are awarded centrally, and then we decentralize the ordering across DHS.
Okay. So let's move on to our next question. So do you, does OP have to do the business case assessments and ordering guides and all those other resources that goes along with these SSVs?
Okay. You ready for me to answer, Ricardo?
I'm waiting for the audience. I don't think anyone has,
okay.
except for one person. That one person is always on it. Okay, and again, for the folks who are answering in the chat pod, those actually don't count towards the poll, just so you guys know. But yes, David, go ahead and address this one, please.
Oh, yeah, sure. Again, I think the audience has it right. No, the Strategic Solutions Office is responsible for creating the business case, ordering guide, and department-wide resources. However, SSO will reach out to the contracting officers and other members of the IPT sometimes to fill in important information on all those documents that are mentioned.
Awesome. So I'm glad that SSO is supporting you on your efforts as an EA. So if anyone who is on the sidelines or wavering about wanting to be an executive agent or developing a department-wide contract, hey, you've got support. So the final question, David, before we move on as far as your role as an executive agent. Being an EA, does it affect the way that you would ordinarily run your procurement? And do you ever get any assistance with source selection? Because I know that's a lot of work. So we definitely have some people, David, that is saying exactly. So what would you say to those folks?
Yeah, hopefully I can dispel that thought. We definitely get assistance whenever we're running a enterprise-wide procurement. And one of the keys, and definitely a best practice, is to get, whether it's your technical evaluation panel, technical evaluation team, whatever you want to call it, getting component involvement to sit on those panels, to serve as advisors throughout the process to help with a procurement. And in some instances, I know in the past we've also had on some of the larger type procurements, we've even had members of other components who've sat on, whether it's the business team or past performance team, again, to help us with the source selection.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for sharing your thoughts. Hopefully, people will understand. The strategic sourcing process isn't just a silo that SSO does at headquarters or the headquarters folks do. We do work with our executive agents, and for all the executive agents out there, I know all of the components actually have served as executive agent in some capacity. We do appreciate the work that you do as an executive agent. So with that, I'm going to wrap this segment up with York. York, it seems like there's a lot of work and coordination, just based on what David has talked about and what we've been sharing earlier. So there's a lot of work and coordination involved in establishing an SSV. So how does SSO ensure that the engine runs smoothly and component involvement is not overlooked? And we have like 2 minutes to address this one, York.
I'll make it quick, Ricardo, but first I'd like to start the session to say thanks. Thanks to the EAs, right? We have 80 solutions today because of EAs, executive agents. They took it on. They've awarded wonderful department-wide, in some cases, federal-wide solutions. So we have to say thank you to the executive agents for taking this on and doing something great for the department. But to answer your question, and David talked about this, right? Your IPT is only as good as the membership you have. You have to have the right players, right? If they're not the right players, you got to get the right players. Decision makers who know that requirement inside and out. We have to have educated requirements based upon subject matter expertise who know the lay of the land and what the lay of the land looks in the future, right? But another thing we also have to ensure is components are large. They have many, many divisions. So if you have a component member from, I'm not going to pick on any component, but a large component, CBP, Coast Guard, and so forth, if they have a member, they have to be cognizant of other divisions' requirements and needs. They could be different than theirs, especially the large ones like CBP. The Air Marshal's requirement might be different than OFPP, right? So they have to coordinate and reach back into their respective components and get those requirements gathered, right? That's critical. And then when I say strong IPTs, I mean strong leaders of IPTs that are pushing it, that are taking good notes and following through on action items. Critical. Thanks, Ricardo.
All right, thank you very much, York. We've been cooking this soup for a while, and I hope that, everyone has appreciation for what goes into category management. But before we move on, I have one final ingredient that I want to address, and this is, it's simple, but it's probably one of the most important ones that I can add to my pot, and it's marketing communications. And marketing communications efforts are an essential piece of category management to be effectively able to educate customers and requirement owners. So, I know that primarily a lot of you on the phone today might be 1102s, but it's important for us to educate our requirement owners, so that they can fully understand the benefits and all the activities that goes into category management, so that they can actually realize the best possible value and outcomes for their specific initiative. And it's important because effective communication with our diverse stakeholders ensures that they have a clear understanding of what you do as an 1102 or what their requirements are and how they're going to be able to satisfy their requirements. And so that's why we have SSO's outreach and communication activities that's aimed to address the what's in it for you and why does it matter value proposition. So speaking of marketing communication, I do want to encourage you all to join us this afternoon to hear more about category management innovation and efficiencies and what they can do for you. And that session is at 1:30 sharp. I also want to remind you that SSO also conducts periodic category management and topic-specific training throughout the year. So please monitor your inboxes or connect with us if you'd like to know when those sessions are being offered. So we are out of time, so we can't address any of your questions, and I do apologize for that. However, today was designed specifically with a mixer this afternoon, which is very informal, so that you can actually just jump on if you have time. It's a Microsoft Teams meeting. You'll be able to talk. I know a lot of people don't like to type. You'll be able to talk and ask your questions, and myself and my team of category managers that we have in the office today will be available so that you can ask some questions and we can just, in a social setting, address some of those sessions for you. So again, thank you very much for your time. I want to thank Mr. Ritter and Mr. Whitaker. It was a pleasure cooking with you today. And audience, thank you very much for joining with us. Again, the next session is at 1:30, but for right now, I know that a lot of you, including myself, need to get refreshed and fed. Maybe try some of this soup. So with that, I will close the session. Please join us again at 1:30 for the Maverick Mentality of Category Management. Thank you very much.